Hello, everybody. Welcome back for our final panel discussion of the day. Just before we start that, I'd just like to let you know that we're running a survey in Slido. This you could complete at some point during the next 2 hours. It's really about feedback and satisfaction for this particular conference, and it really helps us when we're designing conferences in the future. So if you can find time to do that at some point in the next 2 hours, that would be fantastic. One other thing, I've had a couple of questions saying, will the presentations be sent around? The latest information I have on that is the presentations will all be on the EASA website at some point a little bit later, so you can look for them there. And now I'd like to move straight on with the next panel. Really, everybody on the next panel needs no introduction to people in aviation. The moderator for this panel is from IATA, the European Regional Director for Safety and Flight Operations, Captain Giancarlo Buono. Please.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a tough moment after lunch, so our first duty is to keep you awake, and I'm sure we will manage to do that. We have heard some very interesting discussions in these couple of days. I've been taking some notes, and there are clearly some challenges in front of us, without forgetting that we are still a very safe industry, I would say an ultra-safe industry. There is necessarily something that we need to do to continue to remain as such. We have a very distinguished group of panelists today, and together we will try to discuss where do we go from here after everything that we heard. Can we agree on a vision to move forward in Europe? I'd like, therefore, to invite on the stage, first of all, our host, Pekka Henttu, Director General of TRAFICOM, the Finnish CAA. Thank you, Pekka. Good afternoon. Mr. Joachim Lücking, the Head of Unit Aviation Safety at DG Move, European Commission. Good afternoon.
Hello.
And last but not least, of course, Patrick Key, the Executive Director of the European Aviation Safety Agency, EASA. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. To start, I heard some very interesting discussion this afternoon about the commercial pressure, and I really like to highlight that it's very important that we do have commercial pressure. If we wouldn't have commercial pressure, we probably wouldn't be here today, right? Because there would be no reason for having commercial aviation, for having airlines. But there are certainly some challenges, and it's very clear that this balance that ICAO has always talked about between production and protection is probably still not there. So what is our vision about the future? Pekka, to start with, what do you think we as an industry in general, including the regulator, the regulated entity, can do to ensure that we remain, as we said, very safe as we are, and we even improve?
Okay, maybe I'm repeating myself. Our people know that very well. But yesterday I mentioned that what is good today is probably and definitely not enough tomorrow. So we have to continuously look what we are doing and especially how we are doing the business. That is my message.
Thank you. You know, when I think about it, it's, you know, we are very good. And the question is, how do you become perfect when you are very good? I am a runner. I'm not a great runner, but I never managed to run a marathon. There's only a few people that can do that, right? So I think this is one of the challenges that we have. And I think that, as you said, cooperation is also key in all of this. But I'd like to leave the floor to Joachim, maybe, to say a few introductory words on the future and how the Commission sees it from an aviation safety perspective.
Right. Well, if you allow, I'll stand up. So the future, the vision for the future, for us, of course, the period we're talking about, 2020 and beyond, is a period of change because we will have a new commission, the von der Leyen Commission, who will take office. As you may have heard, it's off to a bit of a rough start. We actually still don't know who the new transport commissioner will be. But I nevertheless think that when you look at the organizational setup that President von der Leyen has chosen for the new commission, you already can identify a number of important strands which should also then inform at least in our perspective, the vision for aviation's future. By that I mean the following. The commissioner, or the president, has surrounded herself by an executive team with 3 executive vice presidents who have been given the task of supervising the work of the commission in 3 specific areas. The first one is an economy that works for people. The second one is the new Green Deal, and the third one is digitalization. And I think these 3 strands actually do relate quite directly to what we do in aviation and in aviation safety more specifically. An economy that works for people, what does that mean in aviation? Well, basically, people want to fly at competitive prices, but they want to do it safely. And this is where what we discussed here today about the safety record comes into play. I mean, we've heard it time and again, we have an excellent safety record in the industry, but there cannot be any complacency, and we may want to go from running 15 kilometers to running a marathon. Now, in a sense, we think we provided the sneakers, I guess, to do the marathon, and in our view, that's a new EASA basic regulation, because that is the tool which we intend to use to create a framework which is more flexible, which also gets rid of older and inefficient regulation, which facilitates innovation, and which tries to create a system which is based more on risk and performance. And I think the new rules that we introduced for drones are a good example, because they really took a look at the risks which are linked to specific operations, and we tried to create a framework which is commensurate with the risks, and which also goes so far as to moving away from classical aviation concepts such as certification for certain areas, such as the operations of drones, which are of low risk and linked to that low size and weight and so forth. So that's one area where I think we have laid the groundwork in order to allow us to become more nimble and flexible in the future. We are also investing a lot into data. I mean, we mentioned data for safety as one of the examples of an initiative where the Commission has tasked EASA, and is also funding the activities of EASA to create a system which is more based on data and performance linked to that data and data analysis. Now, the second part of sort of the 3 vice presidents I mentioned is the new Green Deal. And I think there really, I try to make that point time and again when meeting industry. The aviation industry should not underestimate the environmental pressure which will be created in the coming years. We heard it at the beginning of the conference. Currently, the share of CO2 emissions of the aviation industry is relatively low, but it's actually one of the few industrial sectors which is predicted to move, to grow quite substantially, which from a societal point of view is not acceptable. And this is why we are looking into a number of ways to ensure a decarbonization of the industry, which will have an impact on operations and potentially on safety. We are promoting the use of sustainable aviation fuel, but we are also investing quite heavily in a vehicle called Clean Sky, into research which should lead to an electrification of aviation and to an increased use then of hybrid electric, and so forth. And obviously, the operations linked to these planes will be different to a certain degree, and safety measures will need to be taken, for instance, to deal with the high current that these planes will be subject to and so forth. So these new technologies, they need to get funded, but they also need to get into the market in order to allow this industry to continue to exist and to ensure that the license to grow will be there in order to allow passengers to travel. And the third strand of work, which I mentioned with the executive vice president, is digitalization. So there will be a commissioner, my former boss, Mrs. Vestager, who will be coordinating the work of the commission in this area. We don't see digitalization as a means in itself, but rather as an enabling tool which should help many of the things we discussed in this conference. So big data, which we see already coming into this industry in areas such as predictive maintenance, but which could also play a role in areas such as pilot training, evidence-based training, and so forth. So there really there is work to be done. And artificial intelligence. And there the Commission, for instance, is considering as part of the first 100 days to launch an initiative on liability issues linked to artificial intelligence, because clearly there is certain foundations which go beyond aviation, which still need to be laid in order for that technology, that potential groundbreaking technology, to be able to be used in a way which is safe, but also understandable for citizens. So this lays a bit the vision of the future which the new Commission will be embracing upon. It is obviously not a vision which the Commission will bring forward by its own, but together with stakeholders. And I'm very much looking forward to the discussion to see how that vision squares with your views of aviation in 2020 and beyond.
Thank you. Thank you, Joachim, for the very interesting presentation. Let's hear now the CAA perspective. Pekka, would you like to give us a little bit your point of view on the future?
It will be a great pleasure. As you can see, I don't have any slides. Reason is that we have two kinds of world. We have PowerPoint world, then we have the reality. And let's say as a DG, I have to look for the future, create a vision. And once my ex-pilot colleague, our inspector, was telling me that, Pekka, your traffic is totally different than my traffic, because I was living in the future all the time and I had excellent PowerPoints, no doubt. As I said, time by time we have to look what we are doing and especially how we are doing. What is our role as a CAA? Yes, the main goal is that we are working for the confidence of traveling public, confidence on the air transport system, and also in general confidence on the whole transport system in our case, because we are taking care of all transport modes. Also, we like to promote good progress of aviation sector in our role. We have certain role and we would like to promote the good development of the aviation sector. And of course, as a Finnish CAA, we like to promote connectivity, both internal and external connectivity. Because Finland, we are like an island in respect to Europe. In practice, the only way to travel here is to fly. Let's say, I like this working mode, what we have here. We have heard several times the mantra, safety first. Hopefully, we can take at least a little bit of that to the reality. We have discussed about the pressures, commercial pressures, and that kind of pressures. First time, actually, what I have been in different kind of safety conferences. Those pressures, they are the fact. We have to admit that they are present. But the beauty of aviation is that we have to find good balance between safety, security, and environmental sustainability, and in respect to the other goals, the business side of aviation. The confidence of the traveling public, as I mentioned yesterday, we have several elements. Yes, safety, security, environmental sustainability, punctuality, reliability, economy, and so on. We have to have total picture for the business to understand the pressures as well. It's not anymore enough that we are only safety authorities. We have to be much, much more nowadays. So, where is the safety? Topi Manner mentioned yesterday, the safety is in people and in culture. Yes, I very much agree on that. When we are speaking about the people, we have to speak about their competence and especially the attitude, the competence of our inspectors, the attitude of our inspectors. We have to offer adequate tools and procedures for their work. That is what all of us, I guess, we are developing all the time, good working tools in order to be capable to do what we have to do to ensure the safety. I have to say that I have now 10 years experience as a representative of CAA. The more I have years behind in this role, the less I am so-called oversight religion. Indeed, I'm not a great fan of oversight. And I mean now oversight for the compliance. And also Jesper expressed him very self. Tick the boxes, it doesn't help so much the safety. As we know, accidents happens also inside the safety box. But we can say that the far away we are from the compliance box, the more probable there will be an accident. But I am very much in favor for the oversight that we have two main objectives. We are looking and ensuring the compliance by using the internal audit system of our clients. We are just taking examples what they have done for ensuring the company compliance. We are checking some examples if we are on the same page with their own compliance system to make it easy. I remember the time, it was early years of this decade, we analyzed how the valuable time of our ops inspectors is used. It was about 50 to 60% they were checking the manuals of our clients. I think that is not at all our task. We are doing the job for our customers. That is not the idea. That is one reason behind what I am saying next. Yes, we have only two items in the focus of our oversight in the future. We are focusing the internal compliance system of the company, and especially we will focus the performance of the safety management system of that company. How they are doing that. We are offering on a plate a lot of threats and risks based on our national safety plan. Then they have to find their own threats. And now we are checking how they have processed those threats, what kind of risks they have defined, and what kind of mitigation they have created, and especially if they have implemented those. What is the follow-up? That is the principle of when we are assessing the performance of the safety management system of our clients. And of course, one tool for our work is that we are making profiles from our customers. And those are the three principles how we are making the oversight. Internal audit system, does it work? How safety management system is performing? And then what kind of overall picture we have in different areas from that organization being our client. Very simple vision for the future, no doubt. So maybe I will leave some space for further discussions, ending my presentation here. Thank you.
Thank you, Pekka, for providing this very interesting point of view. Patrick, do you want to discuss with us the EASA opinion on the future?
So thank you, Giancarlo. It's quite interesting to see that when we talk about the future, we don't use PowerPoint at all. And maybe the future will be PowerPoint-less. Let's hope so, certainly. No, I just wanted to take a different perspective and to talk to you about technology in particular. Whenever we are asked a question about technology, it's always something about how are you going to certify AI, how are you going to certify automated systems, what do you think about the place of the human, and so on and so forth. And I will talk a bit about this, but I would like to take technology from a slightly different standpoint, meaning, you know, we have at our disposal a lot more technology than we had before. And why don't we take the technological development from the perspective of using it to increase safety? When you think about it, our domain is quite conservative, and rightly so, because as we have said many times during those 2 days, we have a very high safety level. We seem to stagnate at around 500 fatalities per year. One could argue this is far too much. Yes, if this is far too much, is there any hope that we can go below that? I don't know. But it seems that in the last 10 years, when you take the average, it was in Toppy's slides, I think. We are around 500 fatalities per year for commercial aviation. Out of the, I don't know how many million passengers travel. You could say, you know, this is a very good rate compared to the road transport or bicycle transport or horse transport. But is it something that, you know, should we all aim at running the marathon? That's the real question. In my personal view, I think 500 is far too many. And we should definitely try to decrease this number. But we have to ask ourselves, what are the real steps that need to be taken in order to have a lower rate of fatalities? And I believe that technology, if we take technology from a safety standpoint, can be very useful. When I said that we were conservative, I would just give you a simple example in terms of technology. The pitot tubes. All the pilots here know what the pitot tubes are. Do you know when it was invented? Pekka, do you know? Pitot tubes.
1910.
1910. 1937. You were cheating. You had Google. You Googled it. 1937. Who else? 1920. Pitot tubes. And we still use pitot tubes today. And with all the problems that we know of frozen pitot tubes and things like this, do we really think that this cannot be replaced by more modern technologies? I think it can be replaced by modern technologies. Angle of attacks, sensors. Those things which can be hit by a bird, can be hit during the ground handling of the aircraft. It's very basic tools, you know, mechanical tools. I don't know when they were invented, but a long time ago. can't we find a way to have AI or information technology used to modernize those things? Weather information. Can't we have a more updated weather information into the cockpit as something which is basic for all aircraft? Can't we enhance the synthetic vision? Can't we have 3D vision for approaches when you are in LVP conditions, for instance? Take air traffic control, for instance. Air traffic control, VHF radio. Do you know when it was invented? VHF radio. 1940. 1940. And we are still using VHF radio as the only means of exchanging safety-critical information between the air traffic controllers and the pilots, a technology dating from last century. Can't we find a way, all of us, to modernize this? So what I would like to say is, the future is certainly that we, as a community, decide, agree, to invest into research and development, into activities, technologies that are going to increase the level of safety. And I think this is a fundamental change from what the discussions that we've had so far on technology, automation and things like that. Let's invest into technologies which increase the level of safety. And this is something that we have started to work in EASA, but I will come back to that. Now, coming to automation and the new role of the human, the pilot, the controllers, and so on and so forth. It's very interesting because, the European Commission created a group which was chaired by Pekka, a so-called wise persons group looking at the vision for the future of the single European sky. And through this group, we interviewed, 65 or something like that persons. And most of the industry was saying the only way forward is to modernize the technologies in a field which is still using 1940s technologies. How can we do that? How can we do that? Honestly, I don't know. I don't have the solution, but this has to be done. And this has to be done through, I believe, the use of artificial intelligence, not meaning, a black box which does computing, nobody knows what it will come up with, but as an intelligent means to analyze a big range of data and getting out of this big range of data the proper decision aids for the human operators. That is really something that I believe we will see in the future. And we should see it also as part of the SMS of the airlines, as part of the oversight, that we have an automatic generation of all the relevant safety data, which is used routinely by the operators, also by the oversight bodies, to look at the trends, to look at the risks, and to see where there is a need to do what. I really believe that this is going to be part of the future. What is also going to be part of the future is, before I talk about automation, is the new entrance into the business. So, new entrance, we always think about drones. Yes, this is a new type of stakeholders with whom the traditional airspace users will need to share the airspace. This has to be done in an organized manner, but this will happen. And we regulators will need to make sure that this is done safely. But also new entrants in the form of new types of vehicles. Electrical vertical takeoff and landing vehicles. I don't know if you are aware of that, but there are more than 200 projects of building electrical vertical and takeoff landing vehicles in the world. So not all of them will be successful, but you can be certain that at least a good proportion of them will be successful. So this is going to become a reality. This will bring about a new type of operators, new types of pilots, new types of use of the airspace, and new types of oversight. And one could start to think about, okay, how will the traditional business of an airline operator, of a maintenance shop, of a training school be impacted by this new type of operations? Will your airline want to go into that business? The training schools, will they want to go into the business of training with new types of pilots? The maintenance shops, will they try to maintain those completely new machines? I think the answer is yes. This is going to change the way in which we run the business, and therefore the way in which we also approach safety and the safety management system for our businesses. Now, let's talk about automation and how we are going to certify it. Indeed, certifying artificial intelligence systems has a lot of challenges because we don't know what's done inside, the way in which the algorithms are constructed. And for a certifying authority, this is something which is really difficult, to say you have a certain information in and information out, but you don't know what happens in between. For a certifying authority is very, very difficult. But I believe that we will need to have a new way of certifying those new tools by basically having an extremely wide range of data that you put as an input to see how the system is behaving in terms of output. There will be a need also to develop, I'm certain about it, tools that are able to test those AI systems. I read this weekend an article on the new chess computers. Now the AI systems are able to beat the best human players. And they organize competitions between robots or AI systems. And the only way to beat an AI chess player now is to have another AI chess player. And this is quite interesting because that means that we are going to develop for the certification of AI a new set of tools, of methodologies, which will also use AI and access to big data. Finally, the role of the human. I don't think that we will see in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, fully automated passenger traffic for the commercial aircraft as we know today. I'm pretty sure that we will see more decision aids. I'm pretty sure that we will see more safety features on board the aircraft. But what we will see probably is on the lower end of the market, the air taxi, the eVTOLs that I mentioned, some automated flights. And there, it will be something which will be extremely interesting to look at, not only from a technical standpoint, but also from a sociological standpoint. How can we accept, us as citizens, to have a fully automated air taxi waving, 1.5 tons, flying over our heads without any pilot on board? Is it something that we can see in the future? It will happen for sure. How far it will go, this is another story. Last point I wanted to mention, and I will finish on this, just to allow for more discussions later on. We talk a lot about new types of propulsion. Joachim mentioned it, greener propulsion and things like this. The use of new technologies is very likely to have an impact on the way in which they are operated. So for instance, if you have a hybrid propulsion system, you will need to incorporate the management of the hybrid system into the way in which the pilots are piloting the aircraft, but also in the way they are therefore trained and so on and so forth. So whatever we do in terms of technology change in the future, we'll have will have an impact on the operational way in which the aircraft is operated, but also on the training requirements and the licensing requirements. And I will end it here for the time being. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Patrick. I do have some questions for you guys, but before we do that, don't forget to ask your question through Slido. We will have some time to take some of the questions coming from the public. So please do not hesitate to ask your questions on Slido. We'll be able to see them here. I've been giving some thought recently to the issue of whether we are safe enough. I mean, we are in IATA. We are at the moment looking at our safety strategy and thinking, what can we do more? And one of the things that I've been thinking is that we seem pretty satisfied with the present safety record. In terms of hull loss, we have about, let's say, 1 failure every million cycle, which is an indication of an ultra-safe system. But then, if you reverse it and you start looking at different numbers, like the one that you just mentioned, we have about 500 people dying every year. Is this acceptable? Because as safety people, I guess for us, even one loss of human life should be too many, right? And then what I've been thinking is it feasible, is it achievable, at least in our region where we're quite mature, to have 0 fatalities? And that's the question I want to start with to you. Do you think that we are at a stage in our industry where we can aim at achieving 0 fatalities? Pekka.
Even we like to mitigate the risks, there will be always residual risk. That is unavoidable. And yes, we can achieve 0 fatalities with good luck. But as long as we have operations, we have always risks. And yes, with good luck, it might be possible, as it has been 2017.
And somebody defined luck as doing the right thing at the right moment. So maybe that could be the luck of the industry, no?
Yes.
Patrick, you want to...
let's say in ice hockey, people are saying that some goalkeepers, they are lucky. But it looks like that well-trained goalkeeper has more lucky than not so well-trained.
I agree. Patrick?
So I would also put it the other way around. When you look at the number of serious incidents that we have seen, in a number of instances, we were lucky as well. So there are the accidents, yes, but there are also things which, with bad luck, would have been an accident as well. Do we know of any industry which is completely safe? I'm not talking about transportation. So I don't think a 0 fatality is an achievable target. What I believe should be our target is something, we have 10 to the minus 6, if we have 1 hull loss every million cycles. The design assumption when we certify an aircraft is 10 to the minus 9, okay? I think that should be still the target that we are aiming at, which is to reduce the number of accidents by 10 to the minus 9 to 10 to the minus 6 is not 10, but at least that we go to an average of not 500 fatalities per year, but to 50 fatalities per year, which is already too many, but which is something that at least from a purely engineering standpoint seems to be achievable.
Thank you, Patrick. Joachim, from your perspective and the perspective of the European Commission, how do you see this?
Well, I mean, interesting enough, we have a Vision 0 aiming for 0 fatalities in road transport in a far, far away future. So in that sense, it would be astonishing if in that industry where actually the safety record is much better, we would not at least have a similar vision as an aspirational goal. How far we then get to this, I think is, as you said, Patrick, maybe a question of a benchmark. I would agree that 50 sounds much better than 500. And I would also argue that we would need to look at aviation in a holistic manner. I mean, we are focusing now on the very good safety record of commercial aviation, but there are other parts of the industry where actually the picture is not as rosy. I mean, the other day I looked at helicopter accidents, and there are more than 850 people who died in the last 10 years in some sort of HEMS-related operations, which probably leads to a much lower number, 10 to the minus whatever, in comparison to what happens in commercial aviation, which incidentally also raises questions in relation to urban air transport, because in a sense, these eVTOLs are probably closer to a helicopter than to a jet when it comes to the safety record. So I think overall, at least pushing for having a number which is as close as possible to zero is a good goal.
Thank you. And one of the things that can help us in probably becoming even better in running this famous marathon that we discussed is technology, as Patrick has said. But this is really nothing new in terms of philosophy. If you think about it, and we look at what has happened in the industry in the past, we started by improving our safety record in our industry very soon by technology, by introducing new technology, by having better technology. Then we moved to look at the human aspect, at the interface between the man and the machine. Then we started looking at the organizations, and it looks to me like we are now going back to technology for another step, where we're saying, well, if we have problems between the humans and the technology, let's then take the human out of the picture and just leave everything to the technology, and maybe we solve the problem better than in the other way. So the question to you is, are we sure that we are able to identify all the new risks that we will be introducing as we introduce brand new technology with whom we are not really familiar? In other words, is there a risk that we're going to make, again, the same mistake that it was done with the Comet, which was one of the first aircraft flying at high altitude, high speed, pressurized, when they designed the windows of the cabin in a way that was not safe by introducing new technology? Who wants to try at this? Pekka?
I think we don't make the same mistakes. We are creating the new ones. And let's say, what I'm looking, I have discussed sometimes with Patrick about new design tools, what we have for design the engines or whatever structure. And my concern is that is our certification tools on the same level as those we are using for planning? And let's say I'm approaching that new technology in that way, that also it means that then we assess the risks in a new way when we have new technology. I'm doubting that we can assess, at least not so far, but we have to educate ourselves and take into account the learning curve, how we can, in the new world, the new technological world, assess the new risks.
Patrick, your opinion, do you think that the means that we have are adequate to properly assess risk coming from new technology?
So, not all the means that we have are adequate. Typically, an AI system today, we don't know how to test it. The methodology is the right one, because what we do is that we test the outcome of the tool in all kinds of configurations, in all kinds of test cases, which are stretching the envelope. So the only thing which is we do not master is the potential crash of the tool itself. That we have no way of really determining it. Whereas with the traditional software development, typically we can make sure that we don't have a software crash because it was developed according to a certain methodology. Coming back to automation, I think that our industry, if I take the pilot on the one hand and the air traffic controllers on the other hand, our industry was designed to be human-centric because the human operator is still the most capable of dealing with a wide range of situations and analyzing the risks and reacting in the proper way in case something strange happens. And that's why we have always the ability for the human operators to disconnect all the automated tools and fly manually or control just with the voice. So that's what is enabled, and that's why we have still the human at the center of the design of the systems. But with new tools, we will soon arrive at systems which are more capable of having a right and safe reaction to any kind of situation, have a better reaction than human beings. In the future, it's not the case yet, but in the future, I think we are going to get there. And there, we could start to think about, okay, maybe we should review the design of the system to have completely automated system. But I would like to insist on the fact that the goal would not be to replace the human by a machine, but to redesign a system which takes into account the automation as the starting basis for the design. So it's a different approach, and eventually we will get there. Eventually we will get there.
Thank you. And yes, I'll leave it to you in a second, but I also want to ask you something specific. Because, I mean, what we're hearing is a bit of a revolution on how we use technology in our system. And in the end, the expert body, EASA, will provide opinions, they will provide draft regulation, the CAA will be responsible for oversight, but the entity that will need to eventually write and issue implementing rules will be the Commission. Are you ready? Are you equipped for this challenge? Because from my experience, when we try to do these big changes and we propose them to the political world, it's not always easy to progress them in the way we wanted them, at least as an industry.
Well, it goes a bit against the grain what I was about to say in reply to the previous question, but let's deal with that first then. I think we are. I mean, our role is not the role of a technical expert. I mean, this is why EASA was created. It is EASA whose task it is to stay abreast of technological developments and to be in a position to provide us with a draft rule which is safe and technically sound. And then this rule of my colleagues and myself to bring that rule through the system in a discussion with the member states in the EASA committee, in a discussion with stakeholders. But in that sense, we are more process managers than content managers. And I would not want to replace EASA's expert judgment by my own when it comes to judging how technological progress needs to be put forward in an implementing regulation. We are, of course, in a discussion on which themes should be worked upon and which technological development would seem to be more important than another in order to create a rulemaking program which is as much as possible in sync not only with the safety developments but the industry, but also with the political requirements of the Commission, and therefore, as I hinted, I mean, we would want to see progress on issues such as environment, electrification, artificial intelligence, but again, I think this is something we develop together with EASA in order to have that program in place, which is then implemented in a step approach with them taking the lead on the technical content and us finalizing the process. On the earlier point, however, on the so-called brand new technologies, I think we have to go back to what Patrick said and underlining that many of the technologies which are not used in aviation are actually not that brand new. And maybe we should also ask ourselves whether there are some low-hanging fruits there which still could need to be implemented. And one example I have in my mind, which maybe doesn't relate so much to airline operations, is this whole discussion about electronic conspicuity and the question whether there shouldn't be some mandatory electronic equipment in simply every plane flying in the sky, from a big jet to the smallest general aviation plane, to ensure that everyone who is flying in the sky is aware of everybody else being in the same air framework. And I still find that surprising, being relatively new to this industry, that this is not happening today, and that we have accidents where people just collide because they are not aware of another plane being active in exactly the same airspace.
Mm-hmm. The issue of the technology being old has always been something that made me thinking, because I always had this struggle within myself when I go flying. I fly a pretty modern aircraft. I hope, is there any Airbus people in the room? I guess so, right? so you won't be mad at me for what I'm saying. But I mean, when I fly my Airbus 320, the technology I find, it looks really old, although we consider it a very modern aircraft. Like compared to what I have in my pockets, 2 iPhones, and what I have at home, this is a joke. But why is this happening? Because I always thought that one of the reasons why is this happening is because of the heavy certification requirements that we do have on the technology. So do we have a system that permits new off-the-shelf technology to get to the system faster and to replace legacy systems?
We are starting to do it for general aviation, because in general aviation, we still had, I think, too heavy certification processes where we had low-hanging fruits, as Joachim mentioned, and sometimes just the business case is not there to have a certified component bringing technology which would increase the level of safety. So we are looking at a new way to allow non-certified equipment on board GA aircraft that will increase the level of safety. Weather information systems is a very good example. We did that with the electronic flight bag, as you know, for the airline. So we are trying to get there. The only difficulty is that we should make it clear that those tools are used for information provision only and cannot be used to navigate, to fly the aircraft itself, because then they need to have a certain safety level. To come back to Joachim's point, I fully agree with you. It's still amazing for me to see that, again, the air traffic controller and the pilots cannot exchange text messages. It's just not normal. I know I have some pilot friends who, when the frequency is too congested at an airport, they use their SMS or their telephone to call the tower because they can't get through on the VHF radio. This is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. And somehow we have not been able to implement data link, which is just a basic email exchange. The data link ICAO standards is dating from 1992, so it's already outdated, and we are still not able to deploy it in Europe and around the world, because we are in a very conservative business. It's not due to the certification, because all the data link equipment have been certified. It's because the business case is not there. It's because there is a need to have everybody equipped in a synchronized manner and so on and so forth. And just, people didn't do it. On the conspicuity, that's what we are looking at for general aviation, because we believe that there is indeed the possibility to have very cheap chips or systems to be put on all kinds of on board any kind of small airplanes and big airplanes, that would enable at least to have situational awareness for the pilots, to know where there is a sailplane, where there is a small gyroplane, and these kind of things.
Thank you. Pekka, you wanted to say something.
In fact, what Patrick mentioned in his last or couple of last sentences was that there are tremendous technical solutions available today to improve the safety. But the problem is that our regulation is years behind the technical development. In the worst case, it prevents the implementation of higher level of safety. That is our problem. But I'm not criticizing our rulemaking processes, because there are many valuable steps that we are taking. But at least something we should do for that process. They are too lengthy, especially when we are speaking and will speak more and more about new technology to make benefit of that in a legal way.
Let me pick up a little bit on the data link issue, which for us has been a pain. And I mean, we as airlines have been equipping aircraft for years. We've been paying lots of money for having nice gadgets on the airplane that we as pilots were really eager to play with, and we never managed to use them, right? Because it's just not working. And my perception about this is that one of the things that, first of all, it's a shame for all of us, for the whole system, that we in Europe today haven't still managed to make this work. But one of the underlying reasons, in my opinion, is the lack of real cooperation between different sectors and different parts of the industry, including the airlines, the manufacturer, the NSPs, EASA, you name it, right? And all the various entities that we have. How can we improve, without going too much into the details of the data link saga, how can we improve this? How can we improve cooperation between the various stakeholders that are involved in taking this decision and bringing this program forward? Because if I think of drones, which is a reality which is coming, the level of integration needed is such that if we do not have this type of cooperation, I don't think we will never succeed. Joachim, you want to say something about it, or?
Well, I think one of the key ingredients in order to foster that cooperation is people taking deadlines seriously. And we see that time again in also the discussion with in the EASA committee that we agree on a certain deadline for the introduction of a certain rule, which say it's in 2 years, yeah, and like 18 months have passed, and then we meet again, and then somebody said, oh, I spoke to my industry and they are not capable of introducing that, let's postpone it. Yeah, and over time, obviously, that erodes confidence into the fact that certain measures will be taken, and that then in turn has consequences on the willingness of people to cooperate. Because if you believe that an investment, as you said, in a new piece of technology will not be worthwhile because at the end of the day somebody else in the system will see to it that it's not being implemented, then the next time you will not make that investment either. And therefore we should have, on those technologically introduction deadlines, we should have an agreed framework to which we also stick.
Thank you. Pekka, you have an opinion on this?
Actually not, but that is a sad story because European airlines started data communication early 90s.
For intra-organization, yes.
Or I remember, let's say, pre-departure clearances from ATC side, it was second half of the 90s that we started. Yes. But sad story indeed.
And the pre-departure clearance is still not operational around Europe. Huh? So, yeah. So I think this is indeed a very sad story. We spent, the airlines spent, because at the end of the day, you pay for the equipment on board your aircraft, but you also pay for the equipment in the ground. NSPs on the ground, so you pay for everything. You spend hundreds of millions of euros on something which doesn't work. There are a number of reasons for that. We don't want to spend too much time on that. The technology doesn't work. And that's the reason why it's not used. It's because it doesn't work. And that means that it was not tested enough before. Second thing is, you are right, Giancarlo. There was not enough coordination between the ground deployment and the airborne deployment because of what exactly Joachim said, which was, there were the Commission tried to put implementing deadlines which were not respected, and that's the second thing. And the third thing, I hope they are not in the room, but unregulated duopoly of telecom service providers, SITA and ARINC, duopoly worldwide for telecommunications for the aviation world, completely unregulated, which means that they do what they want in terms of technology, in terms of standards. And all those things make the mess that we know. The recipe, I think, is to let the market decide. There are now, a lot of airlines equipping their aircraft with satellite communications, which for their passengers, mostly which is going to be far more performant than any kind of data link, VDL Mode 2 or VDL whatever link that we can envisage. So I really do believe that that is the future, and that we need to find, we are working on it with the Commission, and we need to find the proper way of adapting the regulations in order to make sure that the investment made is not lost. It would be ridiculous that you have to scrap all the investment made, but that we have a transition towards something which is more market-driven offer for the telecommunication.
Thank you. I'd like to start taking some of the questions from the floor. If you can, please give us the Slido. I see here the first question, isn't it time to change the definition of safety from counting accident to understanding and measuring resilience? Pekka, you want to?
I'm very much in favor with that idea. Yes, we should start that as well. And let's say...
Sounds like a good idea, but the
yes,
question
but how
is, what is the metric?
Yes, how to do it.
That's what we do in data for safety. We consider that the number of accidents, incidents is so small that it does not enable us to have enough of preventive actions. So that's why we are looking for the low noise signals in order to look at trends, patterns in terms of safety risk. And we are looking at new indicators for the risk, in fact. So this is what we do in data for safety, typically.
So this is the way probably we will be moving more and more in the future. I see one question for the SC specifically. It's not really top, but it's aimed at you. So I think, Joachim, maybe you want to have a try. The EC and its legal services face difficulties to accept performance-based rules. Should a change at the EC level be needed?
I wonder what change we're talking about here. Fire people or... no, I think actually this is a misconception. We are committed to and also interested in the introduction of performance-based rules, but those have to be rules which nevertheless are sufficiently clear and do not leave too much discretion to either the agency or operators in the implementation. What do I mean by that? So when we talk about performance-based rules, at least there has to be a clear indication in the regulation what the performance is about and how it's being measured. And then there has to be some leeway to the operators and or the NAAs as to how they want to go about reaching that performance. And quite often the discussion we're having and where people think that the legal service or the commission stand in the way is when it comes to that question. So how do we actually define performance and how detailed are we in the definition in order to make sure that the rules are actually implementable? And I think this is still a learning process, but I pointed to the rules that we devised together with EASA on drones, which we perceive to be a good step in that direction, and that there are other areas where we are working on this, for instance, in the area of flight crew licensing and so forth. So I think you need to give us a bit of time, but you also should not have the expectation that performance-based regulation means there is some very high-level target, and then we just leave it to you how to reach that.
Let's maybe spend a few words on performance-based environment, let's say in general, because this issue of compliance versus performance, it's in my opinion a very important issue for a simple reason that as we move along in a mature system like ours, with limited resources, looking just for compliance is not going to serve the purpose of having a challenging vision, like that zero fatalities vision. So we need some change, and we need to move towards a performance-based environment. But my question to you, because I still see lots of differences between authorities, between regulated entities. Is, in your opinion, the system ready to move really towards a performance-based system? Do we have the trained inspectors that we need at the CAAs? Do we have the maturity in the airlines? Do we have competent authorities? Do we have the political will to do it? Do we have the legal means? Pekka? I know that you're a big supporter, so...
Yes, I have been, and I'm still I am. And let's say we had that workshop with an EASA where we tried to find or have some progress for performance-based regulation, because it looks like that we are still regulating as we have regulated years ago, decades ago. But I now understand much more about those difficulties to build up and implement those performance-based regulations. The maturity level between the authorities is remarkable, and that is why, for example, EASA, they have created an assessment system how to evaluate the maturity level of the CAAs. And we try to do in the future the same for our clients, that we have to define the maturity level. And the fact is that for the performance-based regulation, you need certain level of maturity, no doubt. But should we have in the future hybrid system or dual system which have both elements, conventional and let's say also performance-based element, depending on the maturity level? I don't know, but it's rather difficult, but we should not at all give up. In every side, on our side, on Joachim's side, on Patrick's side, we have to work quite a lot to achieve the goal.
Patrick, your point of view?
I agree with Pekka. It's a question of maturity, both for the CA but also for the industry.
Of course.
And let's face it. I think it was in one of the panels this morning that there was one of the Slido questions where basically most of the audience was asking for more prescriptive rules on the SMS, I think it was. And there are topics on which we need to be more prescriptive because we should not allow for a too wide interpretation of the rules. And that's also something that we need to be conscious about, which is that the notion, we have seen in our standardization activities a lot of different cultures around Europe in terms of oversight, but also in terms of legal mindset. The way in which a CA is understanding the regulatory framework in the UK is very different from the way it is understood in Greece, for instance, because of the culture. Which means that if we set performance-based regulations, it is very likely that we will have a wider range of interpretations of the rules, which means that potentially we'll have more discrepancies between the different states than we have today, because there will be much more flexibility which is allowed. So I think it's worth it. We need to do it. Indeed, as Joachim mentioned, the drone regulation with the SORA is a very good example of how more performance-based we can be. But let's face it, it will introduce a wider range of interpretations in Europe and potentially some standardization issues.
Which is a very interesting point, because we heard in these 2 days that standardization is a concern from various perspectives. It's already a concern, maybe even a bigger concern in what you said is happening. So what can we do to improve the situation and to really, in the end, achieve what was the idea behind all of the system that was created in Europe, which is a level playing field? Because, all of these, we're all here because at a certain point somebody decided that we wanted a common market and therefore we wanted common rules. So, but we heard that we still have standardization problems, and this may be even a bigger issue as we move towards a performance-based environment. What can we do as an industry to improve the situation in the European Union with regards to standardization? Joachim, any ideas?
Well, I think one answer is that in particular the national authorities should take more advantage of the new possibilities for cooperation that were created in the EASA basic regulation, or in its revision. I think Claudio mentioned it in an earlier panel, or it was Piotr, but I mean, there are now possibilities for NAAs to ask EASA to help them, to ask EASA to take over certain activities, to cooperate with other NNAs in the oversight of certain tasks. So it would really be important that they take a good and hard look at their own capabilities, including staff levels, etc., to determine what they can do in a good way and maybe where they have weaknesses, and then use the system to plug these weaknesses and move the system forward as a whole.
I'm more concerned about the differences in maturities of the national authorities, because when it's different interpretations, but from equally mature national authorities, okay, there are some discrepancies, but it's minor. The overall approach is agreed. When we have a very big difference in terms of maturity of the staff or of the culture of national authorities, and that we see. In the management board of EASA, we always, every year, come back to this. There are differences in maturities across the different countries. That's where we have the most standardization issues, because especially if we move to performance-based regulations, then it will create a real gap between the most advanced, let's say, national authorities, most progressive, and the ones which are more conservative. And that's where in EASA, with Jesper and his team, we are really trying to support the less mature authorities in getting the proper level of resources, the proper level of skills that are necessary in order to achieve the same kind of performance level.
Pekka, you have a view?
Let's say I'm very much in favor that new idea of standardization that we like to, or Jesper and his team like to improve the capability, overall capability of European authorities. But we have to give space also those ones who are, or who think they are performing well and who are well motivated to further develop. Instead of waiting that everyone is in the same line, we have to ensure that everyone has space and room enough for further development, independent in which level he thinks to be.
I think that's a very good perspective, because we always talk about standardization, but in the end, we need to admit that one size may not fit all. Yes. So what it's important is the end result is not as much as you get there, and achieving proper oversight in all of the European countries. Maybe at a certain point will have to be done in slightly different ways, depending on the maturity and the resources, I would say, also of the national authorities, because we do see lack of resources in many countries, and this needs to be addressed. Let's go back to the question. I think that we have two questions that basically have been already answered. The first one is why not to focus on using technology to bridge the disconnect between human and machine in terms of integration and operation. And that's, I think, what was highlighted before by Patrick. I think this is where we are, in fact, EASA is in fact going and trying to look at technology as helping rather than being the problem with the human side. We also discuss the issue of looking at what goes right rather than accident, and I think this is where data for safety is also aiming at. And then there's a specific question, which is, please expand on the question of liability when providing pilots with non-certified information system. Maybe the question, this is a bit too specific, but if we want to keep it more general, I mean, there's always liability issues when we talk about safety, when we talk about the outcome of what we're doing. And this is something that always comes back in my mind when I talk about performance-based system. How do we combine a performance-based system with the issue of liability? In other words, if tomorrow there will be an accident in Europe, let's hope not, but don't you fear, Patrick, that somebody from the European Parliament may come to you and say, you were not prescriptive enough, you were too performance-based, and that's why the accident happened?
So whenever there is an accident in Europe or around the world, I get someone from the European Parliament coming to blame us, so regardless of... so indeed, that's a risk, and with hindsight, it's always easy to say you have been too much or you were too lenient and these kind of things. It's a very delicate balance that we need to find between typically the safety targets, but also the economic pressure. To come back to one of the panel, it would be completely, I think, disproportionate to make requirements, safety requirements on small drones, which are equivalent to the commercial aviation. It's just disproportionate, and this would kill the business. So it's the same. We are asking ourselves the question for eVTOLs. What should be the safety targets for electrical vertical takeoff and landing flights? Should it be the same as for general aviation? Should it be the same as for commercial aviation? It all depends how and when you want to operate these types of aircraft. My own perspective is that whenever those aircraft are going to fly over other people in cities, the safety target should be the highest possible, because we don't want to have people walking on the street to receive VTOL on their head without having asked for anything. So it's always a question of balance between safety, but also the design constraints and therefore the cost for the development of the aircraft.
Joachim, do you see any liability issues in moving towards a more performance-based system, less prescriptive, with less, precise, tick-the-box exercises?
Well, I think the absence of certification does not necessarily mean that anything goes. And I think again, when we look at the example of drones, I mean, there for the smaller drones, we have moved away from certification, but we use the system of the CE markings. So this is a system whereby the products are being produced according to standards, which are being overseen by somebody. So there are national oversight bodies in the member states in order to ensure that they're also safe to use. I mean, they don't meet a 10 to the -9 standard, but still, if these things do not function, there is somebody who can be held liable for that. And I think the same can be asked about the use of non-certified information systems in plane. I mean, there is a producer of that type of system. He will be subject to certain technical rules, and that can also then be a target for making that person liable in case the equipment didn't work properly and led to an accident.
Thank you. Pekka.
I have a little bit different approach for this performance-based regulation. Let's say, what I am concerned about is that when we don't have descriptive regulation, it's very much up to our clients how they are complying and how they are reaching the goal. And let's assume that our inspector is visiting the operator, and operators and our inspector is saying that I'm not so satisfied that you are reaching the goal in this detail. At the final end, operator's lawyer is saying, how come? Where is in your regulation written what you are telling us? Nowhere. And there is a risk at the final end that our inspectors will be totally impotent. They are afraid of the lawyers, and I can see a risk of there. And I a little bit exaggerate that for the future aviation, one risk are the lawyers.
Well, don't tell me. My boss is a pilot lawyer, imagine.
Okay.
Or the mix.
Terrible combination, I would say. I prefer much more engineering pilot background.
No, but that's a real that's a real issue, because I mean, in the end, if we don't all understand that just following the regulation makes us legal and doesn't necessarily makes us safe, then we will never be able to go a step forward and really do the change that we need to do to move towards a performance-based system.
Yes. Therefore, Giancarlo, whenever we are speaking about performance-based regulation, I can see it's important to speak about the partnership with our clients. Because when we have that open communication and whatever elements we have included in the partnership model, the more important it becomes to take them both at the same time.
Partnership. So this brings me to the last question I want to ask you, because I think that partnership is fundamental, but partnership is basically funded on mutual trust. Mm-hmm. We need to trust each other, otherwise, yes, the partnership approach will not work. And one of the first things we need to agree on, if we want to trust each other, is, do we really believe in safety is our first priority? Is this a reality, or is this a stereotype? In other words, when you come to visit us, airlines, in our offices, and you see our nice safety policies hanging on the wall with a picture of our bosses normally, do you think we actually believe in that, or is just a way of fulfilling a requirement by the IATA standards and the applicable regulation to have a safety policies shown to everybody within the organization. Patrick.
I hoped you would start with Pekka on this one. So, I've never met a manager of an airline or ANSP who told me anything else than safety is our first priority.
But is that because you are coming from EASA?
Yes,
or?
yes, of course. Okay. And I could not see anyone saying, you know, safety is our fourth priority or fifth priority. I could not see that. I have never met with a union representative from pilots, engineers, or controllers who was telling me safety, who was not telling me safety is our first priority. So I think we need to go beyond the slogan. I'm not sure you will like it, Giancarlo, but I have been invited to the IATA Wings of Change meeting in Berlin next week or the following week, where you have CEOs coming, so high-level audience coming, and it's a 2 days or 1 day, 2 days meeting, with the second day very technical. The first day is where all the VIPs are. And you have a number of topics. I don't remember which ones exactly, but you have the topic on safety, and the title is Safety is Our First Priority. It's the 5th or 6th topic, and it's the afternoon after the coffee break.
Thank you for the marketing anyway.
So join the conference. It will be interesting.
It's going to be interesting.
No, but it's. I think for a CEO, I can understand that they say it, but it's certainly not their first priority, because they were elected not because of their safety, knowledge. Were elected by their board because of their management skills, basically, and their ability to give a return on investment and things like this. The second point is that I think, they all take safety for granted. I'm almost certain about this. The level of safety in our domain is so high that I'm pretty certain that, except with a few CEOs who have a pilot background, typically, who know what safety is about, most of them who come from a financial background, they say, okay, safety first, of course, because without safety we don't fly and we don't provide the service we are paid for. But besides this, I don't need to do anything extra on safety, because the safety level is already is already at a level where I don't need to do anything else. And I'm really certain that that's the mindset of most of the CEOs from the industry. For the staff, I'm really convinced that safety is their first priority, because they are the frontliners on safety. And there, I really believe that it's something that is it's not only a slogan, it's really something that they believe.
Thank you. Final statement on this, Joachim?
Well, let me start with the observation, Patrick, that our panel is also the last after the coffee break, and that doesn't take away that it's the most important of the whole conference.
There was a lunch before.
As today. Well, again, I have the same experience than Patrick. I mean, obviously, everybody I meet from the industry, be it from management, be it from unions, tells me safety is our first priority. I still tend to believe them. I think they do realize that if this industry is not safe, it doesn't have a business case. Yeah, because, I mean, I think the Boeing 737 MAX story is a good reminder of what happens to public confidence, etc. If that were not happening every X years, but every 5 months, most airlines would feel that very acutely in their bottom line. So I think when they say safety is our first priority, they are honest. But it's probably also true that I mean, the higher the more you take it for granted, and the more you also rely on your staff. And there, I also agree with you that when you speak to frontline people, safety is their first priority. I think that is something which is absolutely true.
Thank you. Pekka.
Let's say, to be short, it's very easy to realize when the safety idea has really adopted in the company. When you are discussing with the CEO, you should ask, what about your safety policy? Maybe he knows it, maybe not. And then you should ask what concrete you have done in order to promote safety. It's very easy to see where they are on CEO level.
Yeah, this reminds me of a time when I was nominated safety manager in an airline. I went to the office of the CEO and he said, "Oh, you are the new person in charge of safety." And I said, "No." He said, "You are." Yes. So if they understand that, I think we're already well ahead of the game. So thank you very much for your contribution. I think that to summarize, we all agree that airlines are not there to deliver safety by per se. We are there to deliver efficient services, but these services must be delivered safely. There's no other way. I think that, as Joachim has said, we don't see any business case if the services that an airline is delivered in a safe way. So thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you to Trafi for being the host of such an interesting conference together with the EASA. Thank you very much, Patri, and thank you, Joachim, for being here with us today. Thank you.
Thanks.